Welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk, Spartan Stadium. About, 11 days away from Michigan State kicking off the season here on Friday night against Central Michigan. Chippewas is going to be a lot of fun to watch Michigan State that night and throughout the season. Interesting team, a team that nobody's talking about in the Big Ten in terms of a team that can be a factor, maybe not to win divisions, but to get in the middle of it and do some damage. Today at interviews, there's only one set of interviews this week. Tight ends coach Ted Gilmore was out here, and several players, Jacoby Windman, Maliq Carr, several others. By Job was very interesting. But one of the topics was tight ends because Gilmore was out here. And it's something we've been talking about all preseason. It's something I've been talking about for many months, that tight end blocking was one of the things that really hurt Michigan State's offense last year. Tucker mentioned it last Monday. Kapilovic, the run game coordinator, spoke to it last week. We were at practice last week and saw Mel Tucker hover around the tight end area and really challenge those guys to hit harder and do things like that. So what are we learning as we go forward? The same names we've always known are competing for jobs, competing for roles. We know Maliq Carr is a guy that can do a lot of things with the ball. Can he improve as a blocker? Beyond that, Evan Morris is a guy we've been talking about that's come up from what I've seen, second string type of repetitions when you go back to the spring scrimmage and when we've been at practice and the things I've talked about, or when I've talked to coaches, those are the indications I'm getting. Players say that he's a guy that, coaches say that he's their toughest tight end. Okay, that's all well and good. I think those two guys are in the playing group. There's only room for maybe 3.5 on a regular basis if players stay healthy. And they brought a lot of tight ends that we talked to. We don't really know. They're not really telling us who's going to be that guy. They brought out Hopper. They brought out Jalen Franklin. It's a tight situation. And they've already been through their two scrimmages, but we really don't know who those guys are going to be that are going to be on the field, even if it's 10 snaps a game. But those are important 10 snaps as they try to work through it to establish tight ends to be competent blockers so the run game has a chance.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the balancing act with tight end, and it's always, everyone wants to talk about pass catching because, basically I think it's because of fantasy football. Tight ends catch a touchdown in fantasy football, you get a bunch of points. You don't get much for blocking, and Michigan State needs blockers. Ted Gilmore, as much as he wants to talk about needing complete tight ends or wanting complete tight ends, right now they're going to settle for blockers. So when he was talking today about the guys that he believes that can block, you've got Maliq Carr, Evan Morris, not Michael Mastunis, but Jack Nickel is the guy that came up. And then
Kapilovic mentioned him last week. First time ever, Kapilovic mentioned him. So Nickel's come up twice now.
And what
did Gilmore say? That Nickel's a guy that can help now as a blocker?
He said he's a guy that can help as a run blocker. So
it's a pretty strong quote.
Right, that's a strong quote. And I saw him last weekend during the practice sessions, and he caught some nice balls, and he was getting some praise from Jay Johnson. So that's a guy that's on the rise. And when you have a huge position group like the tight end position, Michigan State's got more scholarship tight ends than I can ever remember. Usually you're talking about, in my past covering Michigan State football, it's like 3 or 4 scholarship guys and then a few walk-ons, but they've got a really crowded tight end room, and it's going to be interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit about the mentality of the tight end room, because I think one of the things you have to do to be a good run blocker is you have to be selfless. We've heard that word over and over and over again in camp, and you have to have a high buy-in as a run blocker. So we can talk all we want about guys having the body to be a blocker at tight end, but if they're not buying in, then the job isn't going to get done. The psychology aspect of that, the relationship with Maliq Carr and Ted Gilmore, it was interesting. And both those guys admitted there's a whole boatload of friction between them, because Ted Gilmore, as a tight ends coach, says you got to do these things. You have to pass catch and you have to block in a certain way. Maliq Carr's like, no, I'm only catching the football. And Maliq Carr admitted last year he was pretty much freelancing. He called it something else, but that's what he was talking about, freelancing a lot. And he said that he really didn't get to where he needs to be until the springtime. And so that's an interesting relationship. And it kind of makes me think a little bit. If you've got, I never thought Daniel Barker was a great blocker, and he had kind of an interesting personality. And if you have Maliq Carr with an interesting personality, it kind of maybe explains a little bit, maybe some of the dysfunctionality of the tight end position. And if it's a position that you have to get, guys have to come in, they've got to be ready to work, and they've got to get incrementally better, like an Evan Morris, a guy who's been in the program for 4 years. It's a position that guys usually don't come ready-made. So if you have people that are butting heads and you have people that are in kind of different places mentally, it's not going to work. The good news for Michigan State, it feels like based on what Ted Gilmore was saying, and I thought he was refreshingly honest today. And what Maliq Carr was saying, he was pretty blunt, like he usually is, but that things are in a good place and everyone's on the same page and everyone's moving forward in the right direction. They have to. There's no, like you've talked about this ad nauseum. I'm sure people are tired about tight end run blocking, but it's the truth. If Michigan State is going to be a team that surprises, they're going to have to run the football. You cannot run the football without tight ends blocking well, and that's the end of story. But I thought it was pretty refreshing today, some of the candor from both at the coaching level and at the player level. And if Maliq Carr really does have his head screwed on straight and he's really serious about being a complete player, I think he can be, and it's going to benefit Michigan State.
He's a talent, and Gilmore said today he was up to 275. They want him down closer to 265. He's naturally a big guy, but they're going to try to they want to shave some of that weight off of him so that he can stay on the field longer. He's a guy that can make plays down the field. Had the 72-yarder last year against Wisconsin. Had some other games, big gainer against Penn State. It's interesting what you said about that Carr indicated that he kind of was doing his own thing, freelancing, whatever word he used. That's quality control. I mean, think about that if you're the quarterback. I mean, if you don't know I remember the Michigan game, there was a play where there's a third down incompletion when it was still a game. It was 13-7 in the third quarter, and at third down incomplete punt, and Peyton Thorne was like yelling at Daniel Barker about something. Obviously, I'm guessing Thorne knew where he was supposed to be, but if the margin for error against these teams you have to go against, right, that's where you lose games. I want to tell everybody to give us a like here, subscribe to the channel, go to SpartanMag.com, become a subscriber over there if you're into Michigan State football. I think it's $1 for the month. Try it out, see if you like it. I'm pretty sure you do. If you're still watching this thing 4 or 5 minutes in, it means you're a big Michigan State fan. Go to SpartanMag.com, become a Magger. You'll love it. But the quality control is so important. And the tight ends, I think Evan Morris has established himself apparently as a tough guy that's going to be blocking a little bit. You're going to need that in order for Nathan Carter to show some of the talent that I think that he has. He keeps popping up. You keep hearing things and seeing some clips here and there. Was pretty good in the scrimmage once again. But, Paul, we're at the time of the season now, preseason camp, where we've been hearing things. We know what the competitions are at certain positions. More so than many other years, I'm not really sure who the second stringers are. There's a lot of second, third, and fourth stringers going for a lot of positions: wide receiver, running back, tight end, defensive tackle, defensive end. Even cornerback. We kind of know maybe who the starters might be at a lot of these positions, but there's a lot of second, third, and fourth stringers. We don't know. We hear things. Coaches tell us a few things here and there. We're just kind of like feeling around a dark room trying to find out what's going on in here. Getting close to the games actually being played so we can see what they are as a team. But, I think Michigan State can be pretty good. I'm not here to sell Kool-Aid. I'm not here to convince anybody, hey, Michigan State's going to be good. I'm not doing that. But I do think that there is a good collection of talent in a lot of ways that I think if things do bounce right and if they do get good play at tight end, run game, quarterback, that they can be a pretty good team that can make some noise in the middle, the top third of the Big Ten. Possibly, I'm not predicting that, but there's a potential for that.
Yeah, I still see this team as like I'll go. It feels to me a little bit like 2021, in that I felt like that team could win 7 games, and maybe compete and maybe win more than that, but things have to fall their way. I think Michigan State has more depth at more positions, and I think they've got an offensive line that I believe will be able to run the football
if the tight ends block.
If the tight ends block, and I think they've got good running back personnel. I think they've got good competition there. But we're talking about the schedule. You look at the schedule, and this is all on paper, but you've got like 4 top 10 teams on there, and Michigan State played a tough schedule in 2021 as well. But this is a team that. A lot of guys, they've got to do a lot of good things together. I would, it feels similar to me to what Michigan State basketball went through last year. They had a lot of good, improved depth. They had some pretty good players, but they had to play well together to get the job done. They had to be better on defense in basketball, and they had to be better, collectively. They had to play well together, and I think. And
they were always headed toward being better than their record,
right,
in basketball, which is a different thing. You can go further at the end, but go ahead.
And I think this team can do that. I find it I don't want to get too optimistic about it until I see what they can do, like as far as what the front seven can do against like a Washington, and that's a top 10 team. So Washington in my mind is going to score 30 points in that game. There's no doubt in my mind that if they score less than that, Michigan State's defense will be, in my opinion, pretty dang good. But we're hearing really good things about the front seven. You're hearing a lot more about, you look at a guy like Aaron Brule, who was out there today, or Jacoby Windman. These are guys that are in a two-gapping system for the second year. So the kind of the intuitive aspect of playing linebacker for a second year in the system, it's helpful. And then when you know what your big guys in front of you are going to do, if you have consistency on the interior defensive line, you got consistency with run defense from your defensive end position, then it makes it easier to play linebacker. Still wondering about the back end, but the front seven is going to be much better. There's a lot of confidence in those young guys on the back end, but it feels like this team is moving in the right direction. It feels like they got a lot of work done during training camp, and it feels like going back to what you were saying about not knowing a lot about the depth chart, who after the starters. I think that's intentional. I think it's there's an intentional blurriness there because they want all these guys on edge. We've heard that phrase on edge a bunch of times, and they want these guys continuing to compete, continue to do the little things outside of practice to get better, and they want these guys to continue to be hungry. And as far as too deep and whatnot, they've got to set that in the next couple of days, right? Yeah. Because the scout team has to be set. I would assume Wednesday or Thursday. That's what Mel Tucker was talking about before. He was saying that Wednesday or Thursday after that second scrimmage.
Yeah,
after the second scrimmage, which was Saturday. So they have to start moving in that direction towards game week, get the scout team stuff taken care of, and then it'll become more real. I don't know if we'll hear much about it. No. I'm assuming we won't. But
there's going to be some good players on the scout team.
And there's going to be some good players from the scout team that aren't playing maybe at the beginning of the season that find their way onto their field. There always is. Like a Maliq Spencer this year. He's a starter this year. Last year, he's a guy that started the season injured, came on and played, 6 games as a nickel, I believe, also some safety. And then this year, he's going to be in a big role. If he doesn't get injured last year, he's coming out of training camp. A lot of those guys, Jaden Mangum last year, same type of situation. And there are guys like that, in my opinion, this year. And sometimes that scout team is the best way to showcase your ability because you are going up against a first-string defense or a first-string offense, depending on what side of the football you're on.
And we still don't know much about that safety position. You got Mangum and Spencer there as presumptive starters. There have been some tweaks here and there. Armarion Smith comes in as a transfer from Cincinnati. He's had some tweaks here and there. But he would, based on the first scrimmage, it sounded like he was the first safety off the bench. Now, Angelo Gross has played some safety last year and with mixed results. I think Angelo Gross has a chance to be a pretty good slot nickel this year for the reasons you mentioned. It's 3rd, 4th year in the system. He's a guy that, got scrambled around mentally a few times, got turned inside out. Happened to a lot of players where they weren't sure what to do at linebacker and so forth through the course of the seasons, over the course of 2 or 3 years. Gross, I think, has the capability of doing that, but if they have to move him back to safety, that's probably not ideal, but he's around. But that's my point. Armarion Smith is a second-string safety. Khalil Majid is in there, a walk-on. There's not a lot there. Malcolm Jones, I thought looked pretty good out here as a nickel slot area in the spring scrimmage for like 7 plays. I saw him defeat a block and make a tackle. I'm like, that guy looks all right. For a redshirt freshman, that guy's got something right there. I'm assuming he's going to be playing some safety. Last week we talked about was Sean Brown, yeah. But at practice last week, I'm looking at him. He was playing corner. So forget what I was saying last week at Spartan Mag Live about him possibly being a safety. I threw it out there because I don't know who the second string safeties are.
Sean Brown does have a safety background,
but he's a true freshman, and that's what I thought. Well, I'd heard some things about him. He's got the frame, and I kind of assumed he'd be at safety, but watched practice closely. It's not going to be him at safety. Maliq Spencer and Mangum, they both were injured a little bit last year. They're young guys. They're still teenagers. If there's injuries at safety...
Dylan Tatum's coming back over to safety.
Is he?
Yeah, I think so. That's what he wants to do, and I think there's more corners.
That would make sense.
Right? So, that's one card you can play.
If he and Amarian Smith are backup safeties, and Tatum's trying to start at corner because you're trying to get your best 11 on the field and all that all makes sense. But Tatum is still in the picture, and he did play safety initially last year.
Tatum feels like he's making a sacrifice by playing corner. He's made that pretty clear. And, coming in, when he was sold on playing corner, Michigan State coaches talked to him about being able to play all 5 defensive back positions, and he feels like he's at that spot. But I think if I went back and I watched the interview that I did with him at the beginning of training camp, I got the vibe on that where if there was an injury, he feels like he would move from corner and move back into safety.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I
know what you're thinking. And you're thinking, well, can he do it? Because
I think he can. I'm like thinking it's tough. Coaches have to make tough decisions.
Right.
They have to the allocation of resources. I'm like, are you better off preparing for a potential problems by just moving them to safety now and learn there and just soak them there now? I don't know. They know more about it than I do, but we don't know the safety. Barnett's not been out here. I've not had a chance to ask Tucker about the safeties. I'm just looking at all 22 positions, and we don't know much about kicker and punter. But safety is something that they need some good fortune there. And that happens in college football. There's a lot of teams all over the country that have their finger crossed at certain positions because they know the depth is not there. Going into the 2013 season, Harlan Barnett, talking to him for Spartan Magazine, and even some of the things he said are out on the alumni tour, he was like joking around at the alumni tour saying, pray for us at the corners, at the defensive back position. We have 4 good ones and not much beneath that. They thought at the time. They needed good health. That's coming off of 2012 when they had a lot of injuries. Well, they stayed healthy. No-fly zone was established. They finished number 3 in the country, won the Rose Bowl, had a great team. No one would have known that at this time in 2013. But I feel that way about the safeties. They need to stay healthy. I think there's talent there, but everybody needs good fortune somewhere, everywhere in the country.
Yeah, the other thing last year is that, after Xavier Henderson got hurt, we didn't know that Kendall Brooks was going to be a good player.
He turned out to be pretty
and
good.
He was solid.
Functional.
He was functional and better than functional until he got worn down and was playing injured. That was one of the problems. He was playing hurt, and they didn't have a lot of depth, but. So there's, we talk about guys that are coming off the scout team. There are going to be guys that we haven't seen since last year that maybe didn't look great in whatever role that might have taken a big step. It helps that the front 7 is better, but yeah, like you said, that's a big question mark, and there's no reason to gloss over there. I'm kind of interested to see, what the cornerback situation is like. We know they've got a lot of bodies over there, but we still don't know per se, which guys are going to be the starters. Now, my question for you is, I talked about what Dylan Tatum wants to do. Let's say like a Chuck Brantley beats him out, or because that's what he said, he was competing against Chuck Brantley earlier in training camp. If a Chuck Brantley beats him out for first string corner reps, does it behoove you to move him to safety?
You have to at least cross-train him and have him ready at both, I would imagine. So. And he'll be on the field in this day and age of the fast offenses and everything. You got to run more corners in.
And he worked. We didn't see a whole lot in the spring game, but in the spring he worked at multiple positions. In the summer, he was making sure when they were doing 7-on-7 type stuff that he was moving around and doing different things. And it's nice to have that problem where he is the guy that would come in and play safety, maybe, as opposed to having someone like Jaden Mangum last year, who came in at about 165 pounds without having the foundation to build on. At least with a Dylan Tatum, if he was called on to play in a pinch at safety, I think he'd be better prepared to do it than Michigan State was last year with the guys that they had to call on.
It's an interesting situation because if they all do stay healthy and Tatum, Spencer, and Mangum are what you think they are, good rising sophomores, in the case of Spencer, I guess they're all sophomores, talented guys that could become your starting core for years to come. Tatum maybe he's more built physically, naturally to be a safety, but if he's the second best corner on the team, you got to put him there. And you just kind of and you down the road, you may not want one of them coming off the bench as a second string safety. Maybe you've got a minute ago I was saying they didn't have enough safeties. Maybe later on you have too many. I don't know. It's an interesting juggling match, and you got to keep people happy and out of the portal and all those things. But those young defensive backs, they're tight knit and they're confident. So I think those guys are in it for the long haul, and they got something to work with.
I was trying to get a feel from Malik Spencer today about who was repping where, and I think I asked about 3 different questions in 3 different ways, and I didn't quite get what I wanted. I felt kind of like a failure. On the other hand, it was a good interview. The vibe that I got from him was he feels like they're going to be okay at safety. But that said, I've never met a player that was like, oh, hey, we're not going to be okay, because he doesn't foresee himself being hurt or anyone else. Mm-hmm. But
at other positions, putting together a depth chart thing on defense, and I was looking at the defensive end position, and you and I were talking about it a minute ago. Defensive end is interesting. Everybody's talking about Tunmise Adeleye, the transfer from Texas A&M, and of course Zion Young did a lot of good things last year as a true freshman before he was lost for the year because of the tunnel incident at Michigan, and then Jacoby Windman played some defensive end, was loud, moved to linebacker for 2 games. You bring in Adeleye, and he's gotten a lot of attention, and he's got a lot of ability, that's for sure. But people are forgetting about Brandon Wright and Chris Bogle. Brandon Wright's a guy that came in as a running back, and didn't do much as a running back for a couple years. Moved to defensive end, didn't do much because it's a big position change. Last year, got on the field a little bit. The Wisconsin game, you were talking about this last week. I went back and watched it a little bit. That's the best game he's had of his career. Had a sack and made a couple good plays. Had a late hit infraction, but played 30-plus snaps, first time in his career, and did okay. So that's a guy that was still getting better. And a week later, tunnel incident, and he's gone for the rest of the year. Bogle didn't start in games last year, but I went back and watched some of the Washington game, just trying to get a feel of how they were using him and so forth. And Bogle was their best defensive end that day. 1 week later, he's out for the season in the first quarter against Minnesota. Adeleye is getting a lot of attention, as he should. He's got a lot of ability. But, Adeleye, when you talk to him, even he has a little bit of unknown because he hasn't played much football. He's played 2 football games since 2019. So anyone who just is penciling him in as a starter, when you've got Bogle there, who had 9 career sacks at Florida, came in last year, was pretty firm against the run. I don't know where Bogle is. That injury was pretty, it was significant. I asked Reynolds about Bogle last week, and he said, we have to be smart with him. He's getting close to being back to where he was, which was a little revealing to me. I kind of assumed he was maybe all the way 100% full blast. Maybe he's not.
I think he is.
But if he is full blast, I think Bogle is right there, a guy that can give you a good number of snaps without having to play 50 snaps. But it's not going to all be on the transfer from Texas A&M, Tunmise Adeleye, who's still learning, who's never played 50 snaps in a game, has never been in the fourth quarter, 5 minutes to go, having to make plays. So be patient with Adeleye. Bogle's around. Brandon Wright, don't sleep on him. Avery Dunn came in late in the year and played 300 snaps, but he began on the scout team, 3rd string.
Yeah, and going. Sorry for interrupting you there, but on those guys, like Brandon Wright and Avery Dunn are both guys that had plus pass rushing ability. Avery Dunn's quick. He's quick twitch. He's got a quick first step. The thing that both he and Brandon Wright struggled with, and the reason why they were on the scout team to start last year, was run defense. Okay, so they weren't great run defenders, and you look at Avery Dunn when he first came in. There were some times where he struggled with against the tight end and getting run at. He progressively got better. Now when Brandon Wright, when he was playing against in the Pittsburgh game, he had he had 2 sacks in the Pittsburgh game, but that was a specialty pass rush type deal for him. And but when the reason I wanted you to take a look at the Wisconsin game, or I mentioned it, was because I thought in addition to providing pressure in that game, he was also at times firm against the run. And I think those are the 2 things that keep those are the 2 things that give those guys more value. They're not incomplete players. They're not set up for a possible role. And when you're in kind of set up for a niche role, there's other guys that are in that position that might be better or might have more long-term upside. Mm-hmm. When you go back to a Bogle, one of the things that we heard about in training camp, and one of the things that they talked about on a consistent basis, was how good he was against the run, and even how firm he was. And even though he doesn't have the size that Mel Tucker likes for those gaps, when he's talking about wanting to wear down the tight end, the fact is that's his forte. It's stopping the run. What does Michigan State need to do? First and second down, they want to stop the run. I think he's a better pass rusher than people give him credit for, but he's also probably at this stage, because Adelaide is such a new player, we know what Bogle can do as a run defender. And the one thing that Dyron Reynolds said the other day was he talked about having alphas in the room. He talked about having 4 alphas at defensive tackle. One of the guys he mentioned as an alpha at the end position was Bogle, and that tells me all I need to know right there about what they're thinking going in. So whereas the big Texas A&M transfer with all of that physical God-given talent, he's not going to have to be the guy immediately.
Got a lot to learn.
But he's got a lot to learn, and he's also going to have an opportunity to get better and grow in his position. But I think Michigan State's going to be fine in terms of stopping the run at defensive end. Zion Young's a big dude. They've got guys that want to be complete players, and they've taken the steps for that. And the one thing we keep on hearing, going back to the whole edge thing, we keep on hearing about how the defensive line is playing with a certain type of edge. Mm-hmm. That's what I like to hear about those guys, without going overboard and, like, tearing helmets off and personal fouls and that kind of crap.
And other than Zion Young and maybe Bogle, maybe Tunmise, they don't know who's playing. And even they're keeping it, and Deron Reynolds said he wanted to keep it that way all the way up to game day, with people on edge not knowing who's in, and they're repping, the 3 deep. You've got Avery Dunn in there. I know a lot of people get enamored with the new guys because the unknown's undefeated. By Job, and Tunmise Adeleye. They're these new guys. They're ranked high. They're going to make a difference. Don't forget about Keith Bogle, and don't forget about a 24-year-old man like Brandon Wright.
Chris Bogle.
I keep calling him Keith. But Bogle, I'm not saying he's going to be great, but he's a resource, and he's got more size than you think. He looks lean, but he's up around 250 or so or more.
I think when you see a guy like him, he's probably more athletic than Marcus Rush was. But you look at a guy like a Marcus Rush. That's a guy that everyone's looking at all the time. Of the next guy's coming in to supplant him. But there's some of those guys that are, whether it's technique or whether it's physical maturation, they keep on putting work into their craft, and they keep on defying expectations, and they keep on holding people off because they're right more often. And let's face it, this front seven, they can't have errors. They have to have smart players, and stopping that run, not once in a while, but on a consistent basis, is where it's at. And I think Bogle's the guy that can do it. I'm going to be interested to see if they actually go, how deep they go with the rotation at defensive end. You hear Reynolds made it sound like he wanted to go like 4 deep on each side. I don't think you can do that. I've never seen it more. Maybe you see 6 with a couple of blowout reps in there, but I don't know how you can play a whole bunch of defensive ends. No. But Michigan State's, it'd be nice if they could get some work for a lot of these guys early and see how they develop. But they're in a much better place defensive end depth-wise in terms of having knowledgeable defensive ends that are functional or better, and that's a good place to start.
Sure. And, of course, the big question is the quarterback situation, the quarterback competition that continues to move forward. Maliq Carr was asked about it a little bit today, and I heard him say something like that Hauser's been more accurate recently. I don't know if he meant more accurate than Kim or more accurate than he used to be.
I've read it because, and this is my frame of reference, I'm going to admit my bias, having seen Hauser in the past. I felt like one of the things that Hauser's done to improve his game is he's throwing the ball more accurately this year. I don't think he was talking about Kim. I think he's talking about Hauser being more accurate than his old self. That's how I read it. We had about 20 minutes with Maliq Carr. When you're around that guy and you listen to him, you get a feel for how the cadence of the interview goes. So I think someone probably might go out there and say, hey, he was more accurate than Kim. I would say that's dangerous to say that. I don't think that's the case. But
I hear they're both playing pretty well. I heard the scrimmage on Saturday didn't go real well for the offense, but they've both been kind of equal, continue to be equal. And when it comes time to make a decision, Tucker's always talked about the quarterback needs to be your best competitor. He's also mentioned, and a lot of coaches do, who's the guy that gets guys going, that motivates guys, that gets, the people want to play for that guy. Those are factors, and we don't know the answers to those questions. Right. But those are going to come into play, the competitor, and that might last for 2.5 quarters, and then someone else comes in, and then we go from there. But I'm not sure. But by the same token, it could be razor close, like it was with Peyton Thorne and Anthony Russo, and whoever comes in second may never see the field. That's a possibility also.
So one of the things that's going to go into it is, in these scrimmage type settings, now that you've got like a legit front seven for Michigan State and they are stopping the run, which one of those quarterbacks made adjustments to put their team in the best position to run plays, like a running play, if you see where the defense is loaded up and you have to make a counter to that, because that's like one of the big things that's one of the really big things in game management. Just being a quarterback in general is everyone's complaining every time a run play didn't work, blaming the offensive coordinator. Why would you call that call there? But a lot of times it's like, okay, you got a run play here, and the quarterback has got to make it. Look at the defense, make a snap decision, and reroute it. Other side of the field or wherever he sees the weakness, and that to me is something that we never talk about quite enough in quarterback competitions, and it's often in these really razor close quarterback competitions one of the deciding factors. That's why players that have quick minds tend to win these competitions. Going back to Kirk Cousins, he was really good at that, diagnosing quickly, making adjustments accordingly, and I think that will go into it.
get into the right play, get out of a bad play, get into a better play. Watching the Michigan State-Michigan game a couple nights ago, watching that one again, Michigan State was stopped, I think, twice on 4th down in the first half. One of those was down by the goal line. The running play where they're outnumbered 4-2 on the left side, and the run play didn't have a chance. That's an example of getting into the right play. And maybe the score is 14-13, Michigan State up at halftime if they get into the right play. There, as loud as it was that night, we don't know what the play clock was. If I go back, I'd have to look at it. Maybe that's a factor. Noise, might not have had time to get in and out of it. I don't know how many timeouts they had left, but all those things factor into it. And I got to believe that's going to be a factor when they decide who the quarterback is going to be. Very crucial decision, obviously, for the near term and the long term. And you have to look at things like the transfer portal. The guy you don't pick in this day and age of the quarterback position, guys going to the portal. Do you really want to see a younger guy go in? I don't know. All those things will enter into it. But the best competitor, if we go by what Tucker's philosophy has been over the years, that's going to factor in as well. But that's a real competition, and it's going to be fascinating to see who that's going to be. A couple of guys with good ability, but there's still going to be a learning curve that Peyton Thorne wouldn't have had because Thorne had been in there for 3 years. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then the other thing is like the whole special teams thing. Like I was just looking at a box score the other night. Bryce Behringer with the Patriots. He had 2 punts, averaged 62 yards or 61 yards. He's been by far probably the best punter in the NFL in preseason. So that guy,
crazy talent.
So
I've never seen anything like that.
No, and to see where he came and see how far he, from going to a guy when we first saw him punt could barely make it over. 40 yards was a good punt for him, and then doing that.
35 was like, okay, they survived the play with the 4-3, and he got cut from the team.
Right.
He didn't make the top 120.
Right. So he's working at working on the practice field or whatever.
Now he's my best punter.
But whole point with that is like the punter thing. Ryan Eckley, he's going up against O'Shaughnessy, the Ohio State transfer. Eckley, I thought, did some really good things in the spring. I think he's got a massive leg, and I think he's in pretty good shape. It'd be interesting to see what happens with field goal kicker. It seems like the vibe out there, and I think this is an accurate vibe, is that like they'll be better just because their snapping is better, and I think there's a lot of truth to that, because when you see kickers lose a snapper and there's a huge disparity in the amount of speed on the ball, it messes with the entire operation. I've heard good things about Jonathan Kim, but it remains to be seen. He has kicked 0 field goals at the collegiate level. He's worked his tail off to become a better kicker. I heard 2 years ago when he was fighting for the job at North Carolina, he was up over 85% in terms of field goals made in camp. I hear that he's only missed 2 to 3 field goals in camp, but we'll see. Doing it in the game is a whole lot different than doing it in a game. Doing it with a game on the line is a whole lot different than the other thing. I know with him, at least, they're going to have a guy that's a guaranteed touchback machine. I mean, 92% last year into the end zone, 79% for his career. But there are a lot of unknowns going into the season. But I do feel, even though there are a lot of unknowns, I feel like more optimistic because there are fewer unknowns. I feel
there's a lot of candidates to fill in those unknown spots.
Right.
It's not like
it's not like you're sinking or swimming with a guy will never make it, and we've seen that at times.
There's an influx of new players that are competing with players that have been here before that have been somewhat competent and on the cusp of being productive players at various positions. As far as kicker goes, it's interesting. When you get your first chance out here, Jonathan Kim, we don't know what it's going to look like. I was working last night, had NFL Network on, and there was an NFL game on, exhibition game. Jake Moody goes out there for the 49ers, misses an extra point. The guy was perfect last year. Yeah, but 4 for 4 against the Illini. Otherwise, they lose to Illinois. And then at the very end, he hits the game winner, like a little 30-yarder, and just put it right over the upright. Almost missed that one. And the guy was perfect last year. Now, he's in San Francisco. It's different wind. They hadn't been practicing in that stadium much, so there's some reasons. He's a great talent. But as automatic as he was last year, he was almost as automatic as any college kicker I've ever seen. Goes to the pros, misses an extra point, and then almost misses the game winner. So Jonathan Kim's got talent. Got to come out here and get it done, and you'll know when we know. And the way the schedule is, a field goal here, a field goal there, against Minnesota, against Maryland, against Nebraska, it's going to swing some games, and we'll see what happens.
Some of it's not even like the final score outcome type swinging thing. Sometimes it's just kicking a field goal to answer a scoring drive.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's like you need something positive to go into halftime. So if you go down and you miss a field goal right before halftime, or you feel like you've got to do 4th and short, you got to run it, and you get stuffed before halftime because you don't have a competent kicker. That's momentum denied, and those are big swings. It's not always like how that ends up in the final score. It's like what it does to you psychologically, and that's got to be an area that's much improved. Now, I really firmly believe like you got a good long snapper, which they do, in Pepper, Hank Pepper. I almost said his brother's name, but
he was a snapper last night for Moody's miss, by the way.
Yeah, and it's not easy kicking out there. Moody went 0 for 1 his first week, NFL week, kicking field goals. So, hey, it's kickers, right? And that's kind of like one of those unknown things. But I do feel like this team has gotten better between last year and this year. I think they've gotten more experience between last year and this year. We'll see what that gets them. It's going to be enough? Is it going to be enough to get them to a bowl game? Is it going to be enough to get them 1 or 2 more wins in bowl eligibility? I don't know. Michigan State plays in the Big Ten East, one of the toughest conferences in the country, and nothing comes easy.
I'd be very, very disappointed if they don't make a bowl game this year. I know it's going to be tight. I know Vegas put them at 4.5 games.
They have to make a bowl game.
But yeah, they have to, and unless there's catastrophic injuries across the board again, and you can't leave victories on the field with just loose screws and leakage. And
they had catastrophic injuries last year, and they threw that
field goal away from.
They threw the game away against Indiana, and they should have been bowl eligible last year.
Right. Okay. No more interviews the rest of the week, but we've got a lot of content we're going to be trotting out there. Next week, get into Central Michigan Prep Week. It's almost here. It's almost football season. We got you covered at SpartanMag.com. Go over there, be a subscriber. Paul and I have been covering it for 20-plus years, having a good time with it. For Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni. You've been watching the VCast from Spartan Stadium in East Lansing with the Spartans, SpartanMag.com.